going on, you guys? As per usual, this video is like not planned. I was actually watching videos on YouTube and I got just like this strike of inspiration because I was thinking about something that I had done recently, or I mean I hadn't done it recently, but I was talking about this recently with somebody or with some of my friends, and that's that Ancestry DNA test. I don't know if any of you guys have done any of these kinds of tests before, but there are tests out there like 23andMe and Ancestry.com tests where you can like submit a sample of your saliva or what have you, and they can they'll test your specimen for results. And honestly, I don't know how accurate these results are, but this has been something that I've kind of always been curious about because just to give a little background, I am Puerto Rican. I was born in Puerto Rico. My parents are all Puerto Rican, and everybody in my family before me was born in Puerto Rico. And my generation was actually the first generation to make that jump from Puerto Rico to the mainland US. Puerto Rico is a US territory, so yes, I was born a US citizen. And I didn't know anything about my ancestry growing up. I didn't know anything about where my family came from, or really anything about anybody from my family before my grandmother. And honestly, growing up, that question, I did think about it sometimes because I would watch TV, and a lot of times the main characters and stuff would talk about past family members, and they would talk about, you know, people who came before, like my great-great-grandfather, and no information about generations that came before them, you know. And they would be like, my great-grandfather was a war veteran in this war, like this, my great-grandmother died of polio or whatever, you know. People knew so much about their families like hundreds of years prior, and even if I asked my parents, I wouldn't even know anything about my grandfather who died before I have any, you know, recollection. I mean, he was alive when I was born, I'm pretty sure, but he died before I have any memory of him actually being around. And I honestly have no recollection of my parents really talking much about their parents, and I didn't really think that much about it until I went to college, because in my high school, I feel like I was surrounded with a lot of people that had the same kind of thing, you know, where they didn't really think too much about their past, or didn't know that much about their past, or even think about questioning it. And then I went to college, and a lot of my colleagues knew a lot about where their family came from, you know. A lot of people would be like, I'm this percent that, like I'm 10% Scottish, 50% English, 30% French, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm like 100% Puerto Rican, I don't know. So being surrounded by so many people that knew so much about their family history really made me think about my family history, and I started questioning why I don't know that much about my family history. And at the end of the day, I don't really know that much about my family history because my family doesn't know that much about its own history. So I saw this, I think it was a commercial, or I don't know if it was an ad online on Facebook or something like that, for Ancestry DNA, and they were having a special one time. It was like a holiday special a couple years ago, and I decided to bite the bullet, and I paid I think it was like $70, and they sent me the test kit. It came, I spit in a vial and sent it back, and a couple weeks later I had my initial results, which were not very accurate, or they just weren't very specific. Like, it was something like 39% Iberian Peninsula, which encapsulates that whole region of Spain and Portugal, and I can't even remember what the rest was, but it was just very, I think it was like pretty broad, and I expected results that were more refined than that. I expected results with countries, you know, like 20% this, 30% that. And to my knowledge, everybody in my family that I knew of was born in Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rico is obviously relatively new in relation to like the rest of the world. And a lot of Caribbean countries have this same thing where there's like this divide between the European side and the more African side of the roots. Like, even growing up, I remember there was this divide of like, and it's not okay. I guess like subconsciously my family, and it's like something from it's embedded in the culture, but it's almost like an underlying like racism. Like my mom would make some comments growing up that she obviously wasn't aware of herself making and stuff, and I'm just like, dude, that's not okay for you to say. Like, if we leave things if we leave things out and stuff, and she had to clean up after us, she'd be like, yo no soy tu negra esclava, like, I'm not your slave. You know, I'm not your blank slave. And I'm like, that's not okay to say. But like, obviously that's what she grew up in, and obviously she had to be educated that that's not okay to say. But it's just these kind of values that are almost ingrained in the cultures growing up. And she grew up in such a tiny town in Puerto Rico, which is tiny in itself, like from east to west, which is like the longest distance you can go in Puerto Rico is maybe like 6 hours. And I'm not trying to make excuses for her or anybody, but it's just those are the circumstances that they grew up in. So I get the fact, I get why they never were made to, or they never challenged themselves to think outside of what they already knew. And I had the benefit of growing up in the US in a more diverse atmosphere and getting to know all of this kind of difference in the spectrum of identity, you know? And so I was made to question all that stuff growing up, and because my parents never really had that problem, I couldn't really ask them about it, you know? I had to learn about it myself, and I was lucky enough to have grown up in a more diverse place from a younger age, so I was exposed to it from a younger age, and I feel like that's a big part of the reason why, obviously, I'm able to think outside of that. But, you know, that being said, with that divide between like the African identifying part of the population in Puerto Rico and the European identifying part of the population in Puerto Rico, I mean, just looking at my features, I always knew that I had parts of both, but obviously predominantly European, and I wanted to know where from and like how far back everything goes. And these results honestly don't have that much information as in like how far back these roots go, but I feel like you can kind of infer, you know, given history and stuff, like when Christopher Columbus or like Juan Ponce de Leon found Puerto Rico and Europeans started colonizing Puerto Rico. That was probably around like the 1800s, where you know, that kind of diaspora started spreading out. And there's also the native population of Puerto Ricans called the Taínos, and I think there are also Taínos in Dominican Republic and Haiti, and I think Cuba as well, but the same situation. And so I didn't know what percent of what I was, and then when I got these results back, obviously the results were somewhat in line with what I expected, but not so much. So I'm gonna screen grab my phone here and share the results on the screen. I found this to be so fascinating, and it starts with 29% Spanish and 26% Portuguese, no surprise there. 9% Cameroon, Congo, Southern Bantu peoples, and only 7% indigenous Puerto Rican. See, that's what surprised me the most, because my whole family was born in Puerto Rico. I don't know any part of my family really that was not born in Puerto Rico. And so to find out that I'm only 7% indigenous Puerto Rican according to this test, that blew my mind. 5% Irish and Scottish, 5% English, or I don't know how you call somebody from Wales or Northern Europe, 3% Northern Africa, 3% indigenous Eastern South America, 3% Mali, 2% Basque, 2% Senegal, 2% European Jewish. Does that mean that I can go on a birthright? No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. I have no claim to that. 1% Nigeria, 1% indigenous Americas or the Yucatan Peninsula, 1% Eastern European or Russian, and 1% indigenous Haiti and Dominican Republic. So, I mean, a lot of that was pretty much in line with what I thought, but the most thing that took me off guard was that I was only 7% indigenous Puerto Rican. And I don't know, like, that just really took me off guard. But, I mean, going back to, like, you know, Ancestry and stuff like that, I don't know if there's a feature. I know that there's a feature in Ancestry that you can pay extra and, like, see if you can find, I guess, like, sibling or lost, like, relatives and stuff like that that are, like, removed, or I don't know exactly what. But it's just, it gets me to thinking, because I've seen a lot of, like, one of my favorite YouTubers, there's this YouTube channel, why am I blanking? But it's like Damon and Joe, right? And they're these two awesome YouTubers. I love their YouTube channel. They, like, up and moved to Paris, and, like, it's all about their adventures and how they started their own life, leaving the US, and all this stuff. I absolutely love them, and now they have their own channels. And in Damon's channel, like, recently he went to, like, his hometown in Indiana, and they have, like, a place where they go, it's like a Hall of Records or something, and he was looking up history of his individual ancestors, you know, like, they have these recordings, or like diaries and things about their past relatives, and there are just some cultures that I felt like put a bigger emphasis on holding on to their past and their traditions and history, and making sure that they're not forgotten and they're passed down and accessible to future generations. And I feel like I don't have that advantage, and it's almost like just, it goes to our innate human desire to kind of want what we can't have. And I want to know more about my ancestry. I want to know more about where my family came from and how we ended up where we did, and all of that. I think that would be so interesting to me, but I don't even know where to begin. And it's just so hard to find these kinds of resources, and I really wish it were more easy, because I feel like it's so interesting to know all of this stuff about your past, and I can't even relate to people who can, you know? Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that, because that had been on my mind for a really long time, and I still want to know more. I still want to research and find out to see if there are any better ways for me to find out more about my past, my family's past, or our family history and all that kind of stuff, and until that day comes, I'm just gonna have to be satisfied with these answers, which are, honestly, I mean, I can't complain because it's more than I knew before, and it's definitely more than my family knew. Even when I told my family these results, they were so surprised, you know? And I mean, different parts of my family probably have different results too, you know? Like, I don't know what part of those results come from my father's side and what part comes from my mother's side, you know? And I'm pretty sure that I can infer that probably the more European part comes from predominantly my father's side, but that's only something that I can infer, and that's only given physical appearance and exterior features, you know? So there's only so much you can gather from that. So I don't know, I'd like to hear your thoughts, and if you guys have any other resources that you guys have stumbled upon that are in a similar situation to me, I would be super interested to hear about that, because that's something that's of real interest to me, and I'm sure that there are people out there that are in the same boat on the same boat as me, who don't really know as much about their family history as they'd like to know, or that were on the same boat as me and found some way to find out more about their family history. And if so, I would love to hear what resource you used, or if you know of one that you can refer me, I would be eternally grateful, because it's so interesting to me, and I would love to learn more about my family history. So let me know in the comments below, DM me on Instagram, whatever, however you can get that message across to me. I'd appreciate it. Yeah, and that's all for today, and like, this way, I learned the hard way. Like, subscribe, comment if you feel like it. If not, whatever, that's cool. Thank you for watching, and grateful for each and every one of you. Alright, peace out.